The last thing my son screamed at me, his face contorted into a mask of pure venom I had never witnessed before, was, "I hope you rot, you manipulative old woman." This was, of course, after I had calmly signed away my entire existence, the sum total of a life of quiet labor to save him from a self-made abyss. What he, in his blind, frantic panic, failed to comprehend was that I wasn't the life raft he imagined. I was the anchor, and I had kept the receipts, etched not in ink, but in ice. It began, as the deepest betrayals often do, with a frantic whisper in the dead of night. My phone buzzed on the nightstand at 1:17 a.m., a serpent in the dark, coiled and waiting. It pulled me from a dreamless sleep, not into the gentle quiet of my small Ohio home, but into a tempest I should have seen brewing for years on the horizon. The voice that crackled through the speaker wasn't my son, Julian, the man who now wore tailored suits and a condescending smirk as armor. It was the voice of a terrified boy, the same boy who once hid behind my legs from thunderstorms, now lost in a forest of his own making, his breath catching in ragged, desperate sobs that tore at the fabric of the night. "Mom, please," he wept, the sound shredding what was left of my peace. "You have to help me. I swear, I'll lose everything. I'm ruined." "Breathe, Julian," I said, my voice a flat line, a stark contrast to his hysteria. I swung my feet onto the cold wooden floor, the familiar floorboards groaning under the weight of a life lived too long in one place. My heart had started a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. "Tell me what you've done." My mind flashed back, an involuntary reflex, to a different kind of crisis. Julian, aged 10, had accidentally broken a neighbor's window with a poorly aimed baseball. He'd come to me then, too, his face streaked with tears, his small hands trembling. I remember kneeling, wiping his face, and telling him that honesty was the only tool that could fix what was broken. We had walked over together, hand in hand, and I paid for the new window pane with money I had set aside for groceries that week. We ate potato soup for 3 nights, but he learned the weight of responsibility, or so I had thought. The lesson, it seemed, had faded with time, replaced by a desperate entitlement. It wasn't a broken window this time. It wasn't crypto either. That felt too modern, too abstract. This was something older, something more foolishly human. A business deal born of greed and naivete, made with men who didn't use contracts, only menacing handshakes and veiled threats that lingered in the air like cigar smoke. A warehouse of imported electronics that never existed. A business partner who had vanished into thin air, and a debt that was now breathing down his neck with the hot breath of a predator. To cover the initial loss, he'd done the unthinkable. He'd taken a secret second mortgage on the beautiful colonial house he shared with his wife Claire. A house I had given them the down payment for, a check written with a hand shaking with pride at his wedding reception. Now, the wolves weren't just at the door. They were inside, measuring the drapes. "She doesn't know how bad it is," he choked out, the words tangled in shame. "She thinks it's a small loss, a business hiccup. If she finds out the real number, she'll leave me, Mom. She'll take the kids. I swear to God, my life is over." A profound silence filled my small bedroom, a quiet so deep it felt like the earth holding its breath. The moon cast a pale, skeletal light through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the still air. This was my only child. The boy I'd raised in this very house, working double shifts at the diner, my hands raw from hot water and bleach, just so he could have the things I never did. New shoes for school, music lessons, a college education without the crushing weight of loans. I had built my entire world around his future, and now he was telling me it was all about to crumble. How much? The question left my lips devoid of any emotion, a shard of ice in the warm, dark room. He whispered the number like a prayer to a dead god, a confession in a desecrated church. $95,000. I didn't gasp. I didn't cry. I didn't rail at the heavens. I simply looked around my room, at the worn floral wallpaper I'd hung with my late husband, the peeling paint on the windowsill, the framed picture of Julian on his graduation day, his smile so bright and full of promise it seemed to belong to another person entirely, a stranger from a happier lifetime. My whole world, everything I had scrimped and saved for over 40 years of mind-numbing, back-breaking work, was worth less than his one catastrophic, reckless mistake. He kept talking, a torrent of fear and excuses flooding the line, a chaotic narrative about menacing phone calls, about the hollow-eyed dread that seized him every time a car slowed down outside his pristine suburban home. He spoke of sleepless nights, of the fear of his wife's judgment, of the terror of losing his picture-perfect life. "You're the only one I can turn to," he pleaded, his voice regressing further into that of a terrified child. "You're all I have left." The call ended. I did not sleep. I sat at my worn kitchen table, the ghost of my late husband in the empty chair opposite me, his imagined scent of sawdust and Old Spice a comforting phantom. I let the full weight of Julian's catastrophe settle onto my shoulders, not like a blanket, but like a shroud. By the time the first gray hint of dawn bled through the window, a decision had formed in my mind, forged in the cold, sleepless hours of the night. It was a decision that was cold and sharp as a shard of glass. I went to the bank that morning, not with trembling hands, as he might have imagined, but with a spine of steel I didn't know I still possessed. I wore my best coat, the one I saved for church and funerals. I sat across from a young loan officer whose polished name tag read Caitlin, her face a mask of professional empathy. I told her in a voice that did not waver that I needed to liquidate everything. My pension, my savings bonds, which I'd collected one by one over decades, the deed to my house, everything. Caitlin blinked, her carefully practiced smile faltering. "Ma'am, Eleanor, may I ask why? Forgive me for being forward, but this is your entire retirement, your security. Once it's gone, it's gone." She gestured around the opulent bank lobby, a temple of financial security I was about to desecrate. "My son," I said, the words simple, the meaning a bottomless chasm. "He is in trouble." She hesitated, her professional concern warring with the unsettling calm in my eyes. She saw an elderly woman, probably confused, making a rash, emotional decision, a victim in the making. "You understand this leaves you with nothing. It's an immense risk. We strongly advise against—" "I understand perfectly," I said, leaning forward just enough to lower my voice, creating a small, confidential bubble in the vast, open space. "He's my son." But as she began to tap reluctantly at her keyboard, preparing the paperwork that would dismantle my life, I added one more instruction, a quiet, almost casual request that altered the entire equation. "I won't be co-signing anything," I clarified, my tone light, as if discussing the weather. "His debt is with unsavory people. My name cannot be associated with his. The funds to clear his second mortgage will originate from a new loan taken out by me. I will be the principal borrower, and his property will be the collateral. It's cleaner that way, don't you think? A simple, private family matter." She looked at me, a flicker of genuine confusion in her eyes. This was not the standard procedure for a parental bailout. It was complex, legally intricate. But the desperation of a mother is a story bankers know well, and my calm was more disarming than any frantic plea could have been. She nodded slowly, her fingers returning to the keyboard. She was witnessing not a sacrifice, but the setting of a very sophisticated, very cold trap. They all saw a frail, desperate old woman, a lamb to the slaughter. They had no idea they were dealing with a creditor. It took 2 weeks of bureaucratic wrangling. 2 weeks in which I sold the only home I'd ever known to a faceless developer who planned to tear it down. I packed 40 years of memories into cardboard boxes, each one feeling like a small coffin. I moved into a drab, soulless rental apartment across town, a place that smelled of stale cigarettes and defeat. And I gathered every last cent of my existence into a single cashier's check. When the teller slid it under the glass to me, I stared at the slip of paper. It felt like both a death sentence and a declaration of war. I met Julian at his bank, the one with marble floors and hushed tones. He looked ravaged, his expensive suit rumpled as if he'd slept in it for a week. The mask of the successful businessman had shattered, revealing the terrified boy underneath. He hugged me with the desperate strength of a drowning man, burying his face in my shoulder. "I owe you my life, Mom," he whispered into my hair. "Forever." I felt a pang, a flicker of the old, unconditional love. I gently extricated myself and handed the envelope to the bank manager. The debt was cleared. The second mortgage vanished from the record. His house, his life with Claire, was safe. As we walked out into the bright, unforgiving sunlight, he slung a proprietary arm around my shoulders. "You'll stay with us, of course," he said, not as a question, but a statement of fact. "It's the least we can do. I'll take care of you now, Mom. Don't you worry about a thing." And in that moment, staring into the face of my relieved, grateful child, I almost believed him. I allowed myself a fragile sliver of hope. Because that is the curse of mothers. We are conditioned to believe in the redemption of the very people who break our hearts, time and time again. 6 months. That was the length of the fuse. 180 days. That's how long it took for gratitude to curdle into resentment, and for resentment to harden into a quiet, suffocating contempt that poisoned the very air I breathed. The first month was a meticulously staged performance of familial bliss. Claire, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes, redecorated the guest room in bland, inoffensive shades of beige. Julian kissed my cheek every morning on his way to work, a perfunctory, dry peck. I made myself useful. I baked bread, I folded laundry, I picked up the grandchildren from school, becoming a silent, efficient, and unobtrusive cog in the machinery of their perfect lives. I was the family's resident angel of mercy, their living, breathing symbol of sacrifice. But the novelty of sainthood wears off quickly. By the 3rd month, my presence was an unspoken inconvenience, a piece of furniture that was always in the way. Claire's sighs grew heavier whenever I entered a room. The grandchildren, picking up on their parents' subtle cues, were gently steered away from Grandma's room because Grandma needs her rest. Julian started working later, his greetings becoming monosyllabic grunts, his eyes perpetually glued to the glowing screen of his phone, a barrier more impenetrable than any wall. The slights were small, insidious, and masterfully crafted to be deniable. My favorite porcelain teacup, a gift from my late husband, vanished from the kitchen cabinet, only to be vaguely remembered as having been chipped, so I must have tossed it. The thermostat was always set to a temperature that left a perpetual chill in my bones. One evening, I was walking past the den and heard Claire on the phone with a friend, her voice a saccharine, conspiratorial whisper. It's like living with a ghost, a very needy ghost who leaves her scent of old lavender on everything. She's just always here. I said nothing. I retreated to my beige room and became an expert in the art of saying nothing. I learned to take up less space, to make my footsteps lighter, to breathe more shallowly. The end came on a Tuesday, over a lasagna I had spent the entire afternoon making from scratch, his childhood favorite, the one I made for every birthday. The 4 of them sat at the polished mahogany dining table, a perfect family portrait with one smudged, unwanted element, me. Claire picked at her food, then placed her fork down with a theatrical gentleness that set my teeth on edge. "You know," she began, addressing the crystal chandelier above the table, "this house has been feeling a little cramped lately. I think for everyone's emotional well-being, it's time we discussed more permanent arrangements." My heart stopped. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I looked at Julian, my boy, my only son, my eyes screaming a silent plea for him to say something, to defend me, to show one shred of the loyalty I had so completely and catastrophically shown him. He said nothing. He just scrolled through his phone, his thumb flicking across the glass screen, dismissing articles and emails with the same casual disinterest with which he was dismissing his own mother. I swallowed the lump of metal that had formed in my throat. "Of course," I managed, a brittle, unfamiliar smile pasted on my lips. "I can look into some options." No one replied. Claire gave a tight, satisfied smile, the victor in a battle I hadn't even known I was fighting. The matter was closed. A week later, I came back from the grocery store, my arms laden with ingredients for a shepherd's pie, to find my key wouldn't turn in the lock. They had changed them. My first thought was that it was a mistake, a misunderstanding. I rang the bell. I knocked. I called Julian's phone. My texts met with an electronic void. Finally, hours later, he pulled into the driveway, Claire beside him, her face a mask of cold resolve. He got out, feigning surprise with an actor's skill. "Mom, what are you doing out here?" "I live here," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, all the air sucked out of it. Or I thought I did. Claire stepped forward then, her arms crossed, a fortress of indignation. "We had to change the locks for security. It's just not working out, Eleanor. You being here, it's too much." "Too much?" The words escaped me, a ragged, incredulous whisper. "I gave you everything. I sold my home. For you." That was when Julian's face twisted into that final, ugly snarl, the face of a cornered animal. "Nobody asked you to do that. You made that choice. You've always held it over my head. You expect us to what? Worship you for it. You've been a weight around my neck my whole life." A leech. "Why don't you do us all a favor and just disappear?" He gestured wildly at the street, at the world beyond their perfect lawn. "Just go. Just die. I don't give a shit." He turned and walked inside. Claire followed without a word, the new high-security door clicking shut with a definitive soul-crushing finality. I was left on the sidewalk, holding 2 bags of groceries, locked out of the life I had single-handedly salvaged. And in that moment of absolute crystalline betrayal, I did not cry. A strange cold clarity washed over me, a baptism of ice. I straightened my coat, took out my phone, and called a cab. "All right, Eleanor," I whispered to the empty street, the manicured lawns, the silent watching windows. "The performance is over. Time to call in the debt." They thought they had broken me. They thought they had discarded me like a piece of old trash. What they never considered, what their breathtaking arrogance never allowed them to see, was that I hadn't just been their savior. I had been their banker. I moved into that drab apartment, a 1-bedroom box managed by a kind, weary-eyed widow named Mrs. Gable. She took one look at my face and the 2 grocery bags at my feet and simply said, "The world can be a cruel place for a woman alone. The kettle's on." We never spoke of it again. For a year, I lived in a self-imposed exile of silence. No calls, no texts. I was erased. I volunteered at a local church soup kitchen, a place that smelled of bleach and simmering stew. I sorted donated clothes and served meals to men and women who, like me, had been forgotten by the world. They knew me only as Eleanor, the quiet woman with the sad eyes. Then, one crisp autumn morning, Mrs. Gable slid the community newspaper across the table to me. There, in a small, grainy photo on page 3, was Julian and Claire beaming in front of a vacant storefront. The headline read, "Local couple to launch artisan coffee bar in historic downtown." They were selling the house, their house, to fund a dream. 3 days later, my phone rang. An unfamiliar number. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again and again. The fourth time I answered, my heart a cold, steady stone in my chest. It was Julian. His voice was a frayed rope. "Mom, listen, I know it's been a while, but we're trying to sell the house. And the bank. They're saying we can't close without your signature. They said you're the primary on the loan, that your name is on the secured deed." I waited, letting the silence stretch, letting him dangle in the abyss he had dug for me. "It's just a formality, a technicality," he said, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "If you could just come in and sign." I cut him off, my voice as soft and chilling as the first frost of winter. "Why would you need me for anything, Julian? I thought I was a leech, a burden, someone who should just die." A choking sound on the other end of the line. The sound of a man being confronted with the ghost of his own cruelty. "Mom, I was angry. I didn't mean it." "Oh, but you did," I said, still quiet, still calm. "You meant every syllable. Words like that don't just appear, son. They are grown, nurtured in the dark, silent parts of the heart." He was openly weeping now, the ugly gasping sobs of a man who has just realized he's been checkmated by a player he never even knew was in the game. "I'm sorry," he begged, the words tearing from his throat. "Please, Mom, just help us." I leaned back in my rickety chair, watching a single golden leaf drift past my window, a perfect, elegant spiral downwards. "What was that last part?" I whispered. "The part where you need my help. Say it again." A pause, thick with his shattered pride, then his voice, stripped of everything, broken and small. "I owe you, Mom. I owe you everything." I allowed myself a small, cold smile. "Now," I said, "you have my attention." They came to my apartment the next day, appearing at my door like supplicants at the gates of a forgotten temple. They stood awkwardly in my tiny living room, a space so small it seemed to magnify their shame. Claire started crying immediately, a practiced, theatrical display of remorse that I found utterly repulsive. "We messed up, Eleanor. We were horrible to you." Julian just stared at a crack in the linoleum floor, a man so thoroughly buried in the rubble of his own arrogance he couldn't even lift his eyes. I let them talk. I let them exhaust their pathetic, self-serving excuses. Then, when the well of their false sorrow had run dry, I walked to a small wooden chest in the corner and retrieved a crisp manila file. I placed it on the table between us, with a soft, definitive thud. "This," I said, my voice steady and clear, "is a copy of the loan agreement you never bothered to read. This is the mortgage deed, with my name listed as the primary holder. And this," I slid a final, freshly notarized page in front of them, its ink still sharp, "is the official demand for repayment. The principal of $95,000 plus 12% interest, compounded over the last 18 months. The total is $115,427. You have 30 days. Claire gasped, as if the air had been stolen from her lungs. Julian looked as if I had physically struck him across the face. "We don't have that kind of money," she shrieked, her mask of contrition dissolving to reveal the raw greed beneath. "Our entire future is tied up in that house." "Then perhaps you should have valued the person who secured it for you," I said, my voice unwavering. "You see, the house was never truly yours to gamble with. It was my collateral, my investment, my name. You played a high-stakes game with something you didn't own. And now, The dealer is at the table, collecting her winnings. He finally looked at me, really looked at me, and in his eyes I saw the dawning horrific understanding of the magnitude of his disrespect. He had not just betrayed a mother, he had defaulted on a loan from a creditor who held his entire world in the palm of her hand. The 30 days came and went, a silent countdown to the inevitable. No payment arrived. No miracle materialized. So I did what any lender would do. I filed the petition to foreclose. The law, unlike a mother's heart, does not bend for tears or apologies. It is a cold, impartial, and efficient machine. I did not go to watch the eviction. I had no desire to witness their ruin, to gloat over their self-inflicted demise. Instead, I sat at my small kitchen table and began sketching plans on a piece of graph paper. Plans for a small, modest house on a plot of land on the quiet edge of town that I had already purchased with the last of my emergency funds. A house with a garden for tomatoes and lavender, a wide porch for watching sunsets, and a door that only I held the key to. It's never too late to begin again. I hear my own voice echo in my memory from my last, brief conversation with him after the foreclosure was complete. He had called, his voice hollowed out, a ghost of itself. "I understand now," he'd whispered. I had replied with my final lesson. "But some lessons, you don't pay for twice." He had mistaken my unconditional love for an unconditional line of credit. He had learned, far too late, that the quietest people often keep the most meticulous records. I am not the villain of this story. I am not the hero. I am simply the consequence. I am the woman who was told to disappear, and so I did, into a life of my own making, a life built from the ashes of a love I finally, mercifully, let burn. I am no longer the soil for someone else's roots to strangle. I have planted my own, and in the quiet solitude of my new beginning, they are finally, fiercely, and gloriously taking hold.